two federal appeals courts coming to different conclusions about the financing of the health care law. There's one court in Washington, D.C. says money to help people pay their premiums can only flow in states that have set up their own insurance markets. That's a problem for the law because 36 states are in the federal market. They have not set up these health insurance exchanges. But in Richmond, you had another federal appeals court come to the opposite conclusion, and they said consumers in all 50 states are eligible to receive these subsidies.
In sports, there is a betting concept called the over-under. It's where a number is set and you, the gambler, have to decide if the total amount of points in a game will be over or under that line. When it comes to President Obama and the Affordable Health Care Act, it is now fitting to use the over-under idea on a daily basis. As in how many times the word disaster can be used in talking about what has become a national headache for those seeking health care, and a president who cannot seem to escape the reality of this nightmare. Place your bets. We dig into the latest with Newsmax Deputy Health Editor Nick Tate, author of the Obamacare Survival Book, joining us here in the studio. And let's also welcome in by phone Senior Legal Analyst Ken Klukowski joins us. Ken, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Ken, I'm going to ask you to hold on for a moment here because Nick, as the guy who has written an awful lot about Obamacare, first from the non-legal standpoint here, sort of bring us up to speed as what happened yesterday and where it has sat today.
Essentially, the D.C. court ruled today that the subsidies that are going to millions of Americans to help pay for their insurance under Obamacare are illegal. Now, the subsidies are a little bit like the stray thread on a sweater. You pull it and the whole thing unravels. They really are Obamacare are illegal. Now, the subsidies are a little bit like the stray thread on a sweater. Medicine go down with some of those laws has been the subsidies. The White House has said we're going to implement this law. Yes, there are going to be big changes, but we're going to help you pay for it with the subsidies. And now the D.C. court decision is saying, hold on, we're not going to do that. They actually, technicality of the law, the letter of the law says you cannot do this, and it really raises questions about the underpinning financials of Obamacare.
And the law that sits there is?
Technicality of the law, the letter of the law says you cannot do this, and it really raises questions about the underpinning.
36 states that use the federally run system. This was a mistake from the word go.
That's right. I mean, it's interesting, this 2,500-page law, these are really just a couple sentences in the law, but they're really, really critical. And so the court is basically saying, as written, those 36 states, which accounts for about $36 billion in federal subsidies, will just simply go away. Now, Congress could act, and they could amend the law. Not likely to happen. There are some states in those 36 states, governors could decide to implement their own exchanges as they have in 14 of those states. And there's even some talk about the governors there being able to do kind of an end around and contracting with the federal government to run the exchanges. But the likelihood that those things will happen is a great uncertainty, great questions, and when there's uncertainty and confusion, as there's been kind of all along, it really affects consumers. That those things will happen is a great uncertainty, great questions, and when there's uncertainty and confusion, a lot of confusion, and what it's going to mean for the average consumer, we just don't know.
All right, Ken, let's go ahead and turn to you now from a legal standpoint, because knowing full well that in any document such as these, lawyers go over it and over it and over it, and certainly they have the government lawyers involved here, the president's lawyers involved here. How much of a real, and I almost want to use the word hysterical, gaffe is it that we've gotten to this point right now, and this law comes down to wording, and this was not considered before it was actually enacted?
Well, let me both give what Congress did and why they did it that way.
Okay.
Now, what we're talking about is Section 1401 of the Affordable Care Act. And I'm speaking here, I was one of the lawyers involved in this litigation up to the Supreme Court the first time around, and now I'm representing parties in a parallel case elsewhere in the country raising the same issue as what the appeals courts decided yesterday. So I've been dealing with the ACA every day of my life for more than 4 years now.
We're already sorry for that. We'd like to offer our condolences.
Thank you. It's been, let me tell you, they could rename it the Full Employment Act for Lawyers, because there is just a host of legal issues going on here. Section 1401 is the one that confers the subsidies. And in doing so, it says two things. It says that you're eligible to receive them if you have an insurance policy purchased on an exchange, quote, established by a state under 1311. Now, that number is important because in the Act, Section 1311 of the Affordable Care Act is for state exchanges. If states refuse to do it, the federal government sets up an exchange under 1321 of the Act. The federal exchanges come from a different part of the Obamacare law. So the subsidy section in the ACA does not just say established by a state, but it also specifies specifically what section of the law it came from. Established by a state means it does not include the federal government, and under 1311, Section 1311, means it can't come from the federal exchange, which is not 1311, it's 1321. So you have a double textual basis for saying that is not what Congress is talking about. Now, why they did it this way. The Obamacare system was designed to create a nationalized health care system that I believe would eventually morph into a single-payer system. Now, in terms of doing that, they tried to hook tens of millions of Americans on the idea of government-run health care, but they also understood that in our federal level of government, you don't just have the federal government, you also have the sovereign states. And if the states go along with things, they can make it much better for the administration. If states oppose it, it can cause enormous problems, as we've seen over the past 4 years now. And so they tried to use a series of two carrots and hooks to get the states on board. One was Medicaid expansion, to double the size of Medicaid, and to ask the states to do it voluntarily, because under clear Supreme Court precedent, it violates the 10th Amendment if the federal government commands the states to do something. So they had to ask them to do it, quote-unquote, voluntarily. But in order to make it an offer they couldn't refuse, like Don Corleone out of the Godfather series, they said, and if you don't volunteer for this, we will cancel all of your Medicaid funding. We will strip from you every dollar that you currently get from Medicaid. That the Supreme Court held in the 2012 case, this was the part that was a victory for the states. They struck down that part of the law, saying that was a coercion of the states, and that also then violates the 10th Amendment. This is the other inducement that they were trying, and that was to say to the states, we cannot command you to set up exchanges. You have to do it voluntarily. If you do it, all of your middle-income voters are going to get big, generous tax subsidies. If you don't do it, all of your citizens are still being commanded to buy insurance, but they're going to have to buy it full freight. And they thought they could generate grassroots pressure on state governments to join Obamacare and thereby blunt any future political opposition, give the whole Republican Party and every state skin in the game to try and make the Obamacare system work, and it backfired on them.
All right, Ken, I'm going to take what you just said, and you just gave pretty much everything we needed to know about this and more, and a lot of things that people have not heard. But I want to come back to what you said, and I'm going to bring Nick into this right now, and I'll get your comments in just a second. I heard the words carrot and stick from Ken here. This does not seem like carrot and stick. This sounds like bait and switch. It almost is a perfect example of that the government knew what they were doing. They knew this was going to happen, so it's almost a trip system. Come on in, now we got you. It almost is a perfect example of that the government knew what they were doing. They knew this was going to happen.
A state exchange. But as Ken points out, and others have as well, in fact, what they were trying to do, the argument can be made that what the law really is trying to do is induce the states to come in and participate. And as he suggests, it backfires. The other thing that's interesting to me is the other state, compelling state issue, the Medicaid issue, was the ones to come in and participate. And as he suggests, it backfires. The other thing that's interesting to me is the other state, compelling state issue, the Medicaid issue, was the one issue that the Supreme Court struck down and when they ruled it up again. But if they do, this is the other piece of the state issue that is, if we see what they've done before, one could make a reasonable argument that past performance suggests that they would very seriously look at striking down this aspect as well. And as I suggested, it's a little piece of the law, but it has huge implications.
Ken, I got about 30 seconds left. Let me go to you then. Supreme Court then, is that the next spot we're going to see this contested? And what, if anything, do you expect may happen?
But it has huge implications.
Ken, I got about 30 seconds left. Let me go to you then. Supreme Court then, is that the next spot?
Supreme Court will take this case. The only question is whether in the D.C. case alone The administration tries to get the full D.C. Circuit to rehear it, but the challengers who lost in Richmond in the Fourth Circuit will petition the Supreme Court directly. The only question will be, does the court hear it in the spring of 2015 with a decision by June, or does it get punted until the fall of 2015, in which case we get a decision in 2016? It will be a 5-4 decision. Chief Justice Roberts will be the swing vote, not Justice Kennedy. And this will be the great test of John Roberts. He doesn't have to strike down anything in the law. All he has to do is strike down a federal regulation. And if he does, this will be an enormous restoration for the rule of law in terms of state autonomy when it comes to health care.
All right, all out of time there. Ken, thanks so much for joining us. Over under is certainly what we're going to do. We thank Nick Tate as well for joining us. And by the way, Senator Orrin Hatch on Obamacare said today, Obamacare is working very well for those who don't exist. We know you exist. We'll continue right here on MidPoint.